Great to be here. It was nice to see so many faces today. Thank you, Pat and Lynette, for letting me join you today. This is my first support group in 8 months, so it's just nice to see people will be interesting and enjoyable to talk together. The title of this program is the Setting Up for Success and Caring for You. Those sound like two different subjects, but it really is the same. When I talk about success, I'm really talking about how do we decrease our frustration, and in doing that, we care for ourselves. So what I hope to do today, my goals are to talk a little bit about caregiving, why is it so difficult, to talk about the importance of understanding the brain, and I have a wonderful visual aid to do that with, to recognize the road signs, and that's the things that are happening because there is changes in the brain. So what are the road signs? And then to talk about caregiving and the importance of balance. When we're taking on things, when roles have changed or when the road signs have changed, what do we need to do to maintain balance? So a little bit about myself. So I am a master's prepared nurse. I've been nursing for about 40 years. In the most recent 12 years, I've only worked with caregivers such as yourself. In the VA, the past 8 years, I had a program, Dementia Caregiver Support, and I got to go into the home. I would go in 4 to 6 times over 6 months, and then I would go in periodically just to sit down with the caregiver and talk with them. We had a format that we used where it was education, but it was also just understanding what was going on. And so the information that I'm providing today are really those lessons that I learned from those caregivers sharing with me. And so I hope that what you hear from me is really a review for you or a reinforcement of some of the things that you're already doing. So first off, why is caregiving so hard? And so this was taken from a study, just the information from this study by Schultz. And I'm just going to read this. It can create physical and psychological strain over extended periods of time. And that's the big issue, extended periods of time. It can have high levels of unpredictability and uncontrollability. It has the capacity to create secondary stress in home, work, and family relationships. And I imagine some of you have felt that. And the big one, I think, is it requires high levels of vigilance, and we all have experienced that. And, even though it's high levels of vigilance, it seems like it is necessary because even being vigilant, it does help us take care of ourselves. So these are some of the lessons learned. In my little cartoon there saying that, understanding outweighs issues that can arise. So first off, understanding the brain and recognizing those changes in the brain. And that's related to avoiding what I call bumping into dementia. And so it's sort of like sometimes we'll know things, but we seem to not completely absorb them, or we don't have the ability at that point just to absorb it so we're surprised by it. And what I'm hoping is that we can decrease some of that surprise and we can apply what we're understanding about the brain so that we recognize, or we can set up the environment so that we're not surprised and we're prepared. The other big one is to recognize role change, because every time we take on a role change, when all of a sudden now I have to do all the bills, or I have to do all the driving, or I have to maintain the house, I have to do the maintenance. Every time we do that, we need to recognize that this is something new, and it's like a scale that we need to balance. So we need to be taking care of ourselves. And I have a little toolbox that we're going to talk about on how you can do that. So this is an image. It's not the best looking image, but I just had pasted this into the Word document. But this is a form you can find on the internet. Maybe some of you already have it. I love it because it really does, tell you about what the brain does more than memory. So you can find this on the internet, Simplified Brain Behavior Relationships, if you guys want to write it down. But that way, you know, and you can think about in terms of, you know, what the brain does. So I'm going to focus my attention on the frontal lobe there. So with the frontal lobe, it has lots of things that it does. And so we're talking about not just memory, but we're talking about problem solving or inhibition, which means that you can be more impulsive, or we can have, you know, decreased judgment, or our organizational skills. Also a limit in our awareness of our own abilities, self-monitoring, able to plan, able to initiate. All of these things, we can see these, you know, regularly in our loved ones, what's going on. But I want us to identify those so we can think more in terms of this is the brain and not the person. You know, they're not doing this to you deliberately. You know, they're not doing things on purpose, but many times it's because the brain is affected, and therefore it cannot initiate, or it cannot decrease some of that inhibition, or it cannot recognize the limitations. So I encourage you to get one of these forms and then just, you know, be aware of what the brain is doing. It'll help you with recognizing road signs. And so the road signs are when you recognize that there's something going on, when they're not able to recognize what they're doing, maybe poor judgment. Here's a couple of examples. When I take him out to a restaurant, these are quotes from caregivers. When I take him out to a restaurant, he makes a mess. His food drops on the table. He uses too much ketchup. He keeps putting packets of sugar in when he's already added. And another one is, I left him in the car while I quickly went into Walmart, and he was roaming the parking lot when I returned. I told him not to leave the car. And so maybe some of these things have happened with you when you've gone to restaurants, or you know, run quickly into a store or something, and I want to come back. But what I want us to do is recognize those road signs. You know, with the first one, when I take him out to a restaurant and he makes a mess, you know, he may not be able to, you know, plan or organize or reason. So a lot of times they're driven by the environment. So what I see is what I do. So if there's ketchup there, if there's sugar there, if there's salt there, you know, that might be something that it's, you know, you can manipulate and you can put on and you can use because it's right there. I'm prompted to use it, you know. So, and then with the car, you know, probably seeing other people out walking in the parking lot too, or maybe wanting to look for you. You know, those are the things that are going to happen. So they can't remember maybe that you're going to be right back, or they're supposed to stay in the car. But again, those are parts of the brain, when you go back to that frontal lobe, that you'll recognize those are the pieces of the brain that are affected. And we're going to talk, well, I'll come back to this, and we're going to talk about, you know, what some things that the caregiver can do, you know, so that would be helpful. So recognizing brain change and helping to decrease the daily frustration. So when you name one of those changes, when you see something that is happening, they're not able to pay attention. When you recognize that you've said a number of things to them and they're just not, you know, they didn't hear it, you thought they just ignored you, you thought they chose not to do something. But a lot of times it's that ability to pay attention. And so what you can do as the caregiver is you can, before you even talk to them, is you make sure that you are looking at them, they are looking at you. Many times we'll be in the kitchen going, do you want something to eat? And you don't get a response. You know, well, it's because even though you're the only other person in the house and you're the only person talking, they don't know you're talking to them sometimes. So sometimes that visual cue, you've got to be right in front of them. You've got to get their attention. You are the visual cue. So that's helpful. You know, a lot of times people get frustrated because they just, you know, because 1 minute they're able to seem like they're paying attention and 1 minute they're not. But if you want to decrease your own frustration, you can always make sure that if there's something you want to be sure they're doing, that you first are getting their attention and then talking to them. And then about ability to remember what is said. So a lot of times we're having to repeat things. You can give them notes. But another thing that you're probably doing is, let's say you say on Monday you've got a doctor's appointment on Thursday, and now they're trying so desperately hard to remember that it's Thursday, you know, 3 times that day. They're saying, when is our appointment? You know, the next day, when is the appointment? When is the appointment? So a lot of times you can decrease some of that frustration by waiting till the day of and say, you know, and if it's in the afternoon, wait till the afternoon, say, we're going to go see the doctor today, but you can avoid some of those repeat questions. Some of the things that we do, we're just so, we normally do them so often, it's just part of our routine, but some of those things we're going to have to be mindful of so that we don't do them, because it's going to decrease some of that, your own frustration with repeated questions. Ability to organize, avoid those tasks that require organization. If you're wanting them to help pay the bills or something, remember about their ability, their limitations, what they can do or can't do. But in doing that, we recognize a role change with that. An ability to make good judgments. If they're not making good judgments, then you want to make sure that the tasks that could be unsafe, that you're avoiding those. You're getting rid of the prompts, or you're removing the tools, or you're decreasing access to the stove. Certain things you can do, keys, so that they're not prompted to do them because their judgment may not be available to them, good judgment. So I want to go back to this for a second. So with recognizing the road signs, when you go to a restaurant, what this caregiver did, it was really great. So she was going to a restaurant she went to frequently, and that made it easy for her because they knew her. She also had one of the little cards that said, the person I'm with now has dementia, and so she give it to the waitress. And then she just, as they were sitting down, she would automatically pick up that little canister, all the packets and stuff, and she would just say to the waiter, go ahead and take these with you, thank you. And so that was a prompt to just get them out of the way. She could take the 3 or 4 packets that she needed and just keep them on the table, and that way they had as much as they needed. But that way she wasn't causing her angst about, how messy the table was. The other thing she learned to do is that visual spatial, he was making a mess because his visual spatial, the distance, he wasn't able to figure it out. So the plate was too far away and he never thought to move it up. So she just would automatically not say anything, but just move the plate up. So that was helpful. But she was recognizing sort of those road signs and doing something about the environment. About leaving him in the car, there's a couple of things she could do. She was just, even though it was a quick trip, she went ahead and take him with her. And if he didn't want to go, then sometimes she would put off going until he was ready to go, or she would coax him with doing something. We're going to go in and get a cup of coffee, so something like that. But she would coax him. But also part of this too, got her in touch with, sometimes she just needed to be, to go to the store by herself. And so she started setting up a person to come in regularly to give her that time where she could run into the store. And so that was helpful. She was using a resource. Here's a caregiver quote. The worst part is the checkbook. We've been married 35 years and now I have to learn to manage our finances. And this is really important. Every time you're having to take on something that's new, that role change is something I want you to really be mindful of, because this is where balance comes in. This is where you want to recognize, with everything that I'm taking on, I need to also balance it with something else. So with every change, there needs to be caregiver balance. So if I'm having to do reminders, if all of a sudden now I've got to do all the bills, if now I'm having to do activities of daily living, what else can I do? And I'm going to talk about the tools. So there's the tools, the resources, the me time, and a planned respite. And when I talk about planned respite, I mean, let's say that I'm going to make sure that I know one person's going to come to my house every Wednesday, that maybe I've talked to a family member and they're always available on Saturday afternoon. But what I do is I make sure I'm talking to someone and I'm negotiating a time that I can rely on. And having that planned time, even if it's a short time, because I planned it, psychologically, it makes a big difference for me, because I know it's something I can depend on. I know that a time is coming for me. So with this is proactively caring for you. With each role change, I want you to think about, how should you set up your environment up to match the change? Just like I talked about with the caregiver, moving the items off the table. There's other things that you can do in your environment that are used as prompts. So if there's something out that you don't want to be messed with or you want to protect, then you change your environment. One example that I used to tell caregivers, because they would their loved one would carry their wallet, and it had their Medicare card, it had their their ID, it had important things in it, a credit card, and she was always afraid that he was going to lose them because he was losing a lot of things. And so what we did was, we made copies of those things and put the copy in the wallet, and then put the real ones aside, and she kept those. And that way she didn't have to worry about it, and he could still carry his wallet. He still had his information, but she took care of something that she didn't need to have to worry about. And the same thing, I don't want to talk about another scenario that I'll be talking about shortly, but just setting up your world so that if there's something that you're worried about, think about that, be aware of it, and go, okay, so what can I do differently? So like with car keys, sometimes we're so used to them either being in our purse, or we hang them up on a little thing outside of the door. You may want to change those habits and put them somewhere else, but put something else in its place. If there's a key up there and he's always used to the keys, maybe he doesn't turn the car on, but you want to, take that car key off, but put other keys up there just so it stays looking the same. It's still a prompt, or it's still just a sort of a reminder, that his keys are there, but he can't do something that's unsafe with those things. Tools that you can use. Sometimes people use alarms so that they know when the door opens, or they're putting cameras on their phones around their house. It makes it so much easier. Like if you want to be out in the yard, you want to be gardening right now, but they don't want to come outside, so you can always see what they're doing. You can always look and see. And a monitor, sometimes there are two ways now, so that you can actually talk to the person, say, I'll be right in if you start seeing them get up or do something that you feel is unsafe. That way you can still do things around your home if you're upstairs or downstairs or out in the yard. So that's really helpful. And then when you start identifying, people that you can use, or adult daycare, or even coming to a support group is a huge resource too. So using those resources that, take care of you, those people that are in your life that you can tap and negotiate with them, or using, an adult daycare, that kind of thing. And again, the importance of me time. Every time you add something, or you're recognizing that, this has changed, or now I have to do this, I want you to check in and get more me time. And me time for a lot of my caregivers happen to be just the early morning. They just really got up early. They enjoyed their coffee time or their tea, or, whatever they were going to do in the mornings. And that was their time. And a lot of times it was the same. I'm sorry. It was the same in the evenings. They would stay up a little bit later, and just to have their own me time. But again, planning that respite time is so important. If you can negotiate with a family member, or a friend, or an agency, that you always have that time planned so that you can have time to yourself. It will mean a lot. It helps your own creativity when you are getting a break. It helps you to recognize things that are going on, helps you recognize the brain changes so that you will set up your environment. But when we're tired, when we're exhausted, we don't do that. We're not able to be that creative. So the me time and the respite time is really helpful, because it actually, will help you be more creative in setting up your environment. So here's a scenario that I just wanted to go over. Let's see, the bills and paperwork, and I'm going to have to read this one. So this was from a caregiver. She said he gets the mail and he wants to be helpful, but he can't pay the bills now. He opens up everything and he puts them on the desk. He messes everything up, is that the way she described it. Sometimes he throws things away. And so with that, what we can point out about him is that he wants to help. He doesn't recognize his own limitations. He's not able to organize things. So what she might want to do is she might want to get the mail, or she may want to make that a trip with him to get the mail. And as he sorts it, that she, pull out the bills and let him have everything else. But if she gets the mail, she can just hand him all the other papers. I know we all get lots of papers that we don't need, that we don't even need to go through, but those are some things that he can help with and he can sort. And that way you protect those bills that you know you're going to have to pay yourself, and put those in a separate location until you can get to them. And then you can share that information with them after if you want to. But that way you've recognized what the brain is doing, and then how you can set up your environment in a different way, and that decreases your own frustration. So again, that's what I was just going through. You recognize the road signs, and then you use the tool that's necessary. And this is just a slide that I have that sort of goes through some simple communication tools that I just like. It is still another way that you can decrease some of your own frustrations. And these are things you probably are doing. You know, you keep your sentences short, 3 to 5 words, doing something like time for breakfast, or can I help? Or, how about sitting here? It's time to go. Using visual cues, always using prompts when you need to, showing what you wanted to do, giving him, one task at a time, using hand motions, stand up or sit down or let's go. These are all ways that will help him process information. Limit your distractions when you are talking to him. If you really need to, talk with him and get his attention, be sure again to make sure he's looking at you, you're looking at him, you have his attention. Decrease the other distractions, turning off the television, being aware of the other noises, and allow time for processing. It may take a little bit of time, using the short statements, giving some time to process, that kind of thing. And then tell him one thing at a time, and allow time to transition to the next. And again, this is just, I just put this in again as a repeat. With each role change, think about how you can set up your environment, identify those tools that you can use, identify a resource, a person, and increase your me time. And again, those lessons learned, if you can understand the brain, if you can recognize that role change. And then I added in here grief and loss. With every role change, and this is something that, I think we'll talk about another day, but with role change does come an awareness of grief and loss, because it means that there's one more thing. There's something that has changed in your life, and that is still a loss. And when we have grief or a loss, we also need to be mindful of it. And it's also reinforces the need to take care of ourselves. It actually gives us permission to take care of ourselves and to allow more me time and more balanced time. So take that me time, recognize and plan for those dementia moments. Questions?